GD is not a government that is pro-Russian. It is Russia's government to control Georgia.
What needs to be done to, again, save Georgia as a free state, to save Georgia's democracy, however imperfect it has been all the way?
Bibilashvili has absolute power. He has the means and the ability to do whatever he wants in this country. The people who are now in jail, they're in jail and not dead because he doesn't need that. And we're here and not in jail because apparently we're not enough of a threat.
And even if then you destroy the dictatorial regime, it will take another decade to recover from the traumas that dictatorship inflicted on you as a nation. Hello and welcome to Talk Georgia, an English podcast covering Georgian and regional politics. Talk Georgia is brought to you by Droeba Media Group, a trusted source of news and analysis. Also GSAC, a think tank providing comprehensive political analysis of Georgia and YXC region. Also academic and practical training for postgraduate students and mid-career professionals. To dive into the key developments of the Georgian politics, today we're joined by Mr. Zaza Bibilashvili, a lawyer, writer, publicist, former politician. He is founder and director of the Javjavadze Center for European Studies, also the Wagner Society in Georgia. Again, he used to be board member of the UNM, Georgia's United National Movement. He's Georgian and US educated. His degrees include degree in law and degree in international relations, if I'm not mistaken.
Right.
Mr. Bibilashvili, welcome to the show. You can add to anything to your bio before we get down to business.
I think that was overly generous anyway, so thank you for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
Indeed, it's my pleasure. And let's get started with the recent developments of Georgian politics. As we speak, or maybe a little bit later, Georgian so-called president will be addressing UN General Assembly. And most likely he's going to be the first politician ever who addressed this assembly in Georgian. Well, let's give him credit for that. At least half an hour the Georgian language will be kind of resounding in that hall. Also, the Georgian foreign minister, so-called foreign minister, I would never get tired of saying that this is a legitimate government, so was never invited to the European ministerial in Luxembourg, and it was not strictly EU, or it was not strictly EU plus candidate countries. It was EU, Black Sea, and the wider region,
and the
Central Asian countries, and again the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan and Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan. All those guys are there. Will be there present on the 20th of October. The Georgian foreign minister will be absent. So what message is that? I think that we can comment on that. It's been 300 consecutive days that the Georgian people are protesting Ivanishvili's illegitimate regime, Georgia's turn away from the European path, and the political prisoners who are in jail as we speak. There is an unprecedented attack on civil society organizations. At least 30 of them are under pressure from anti-corruption agency, and they are demanding the grant information from them. Some of them very sensitive information, and for the last few weeks, we witnessed again unprecedented attack on the ambassadors of the Western countries, on the EU ambassador, on the British ambassador, on the Dutch ambassador. And it's not just criticism, it is, insult that is coming from talking heads of Georgia. And it's not just peripheral talking heads. We are talking about, the GD Prime Minister and GD Parliament Speaker, and Mayor Kaladze, who is Georgian Dream's Secretary General. So, you can pick up any topic to comment, and then we'll move to more fundamental issues, I would say.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about current Georgia. You started with so-called President Bibilashvili. Indeed, he's a so-called president because he's not a politician and he's not had a political career. He does not have a political clout, no political weight whatsoever. And he's somebody who's just been handpicked for unclear or maybe quite clear reasons and put in a position in which he's now addressing the UN. And in fact, that is something very similar and identical of all GD politicians, or all GD, I shouldn't call them politicians, all GD speaking heads, talking heads. If you look at GD government in the last 10 years or so, the people who speak on behalf of Georgia, no matter the position they occupy, mostly these are people who have no political biography, literally. These are not people that you can criticize because they have said this or that, or they have traveled their way to their positions of power. No, these are people who have been handpicked by one wealthy individual based on their obedience, because they obey him for whatever reasons, whether it's corruption, whether it's so-called compromise, but they obey him and they are installed in those positions. So it is clear that finally, after 13 years of GD being in power, our friends have decided to leave the table and exit the show and not play along, because how can you talk to somebody who does not represent anyone, who has not been elected, who's just been handpicked and put in a position of power? And of course they say it otherwise. They sell it internally as if, well, we won the elections, which everybody knows is not the case. Let us remind our viewers that at some point during COVID and before COVID, we had a government which consisted almost exclusively of people who were coming from the Kartubank background. Kartubank is a personal bank of Bizina Ivanishvili, the Russian oligarch who hijacked Georgia 13 years ago, and we can talk about how he did it back then. But his the healthcare minister during COVID was his wife's dentist. The Minister of State Security was his former bodyguard. The Prime Minister was his personal banker. The following Prime Minister was his personal assistant. And there was a leakage a few years ago when he talks about that former Prime Minister saying that he doesn't know anything. He doesn't know finance. He doesn't know law. And when asked if he was his personal secretary, Ivanishvili says of Gharibashvili, who's now he's no longer in favor, but he says, call him whatever you want. So basically, we have that situation when Georgia has been hijacked. And it took our friends and unfortunately some people in Georgia to realize that some 13 years. What used to be a revolutionary or a radical idea 12, 13 years ago, and people like myself were saying it, that GD is in fact a Russian hybrid force, today is a self-evident truth. GD is not a government that is pro-Russian. It is Russia's government to control Georgia, which is fundamentally different. And let me just say this. Very often people struggle to understand why Kaladze, Papuashvili, Kobakhidze, and others insult Western diplomats, Western politicians. I mean, you can criticize, you can disagree, you can do whatever, but the form is so vile that it cannot be explained unless, of course, you realize, well, what would Russia do if Russia wanted to alienate Georgia from all of its friends? And then everything becomes clear. It's like the very last episode of Matrix, the movie, when he finally realized, well, this is what's happening. I mean, this is what's happening. I mean, we have people who are actually, maybe more like Avatar. They're just empty shells. And then there's somebody else who is giving them talking points, somebody else who is giving them instructions on what to do and how. And I deeply believe, in fact, there is information that at least since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russians no longer instruct GD, but they have operative units here on the ground. And these are the people who come up with these ideas and policies, which are sometimes shocking to our friends. And again, when asked why GD does that, well, allow the thought that GD is a Russian hybrid force, then everything becomes clear.
Yeah, I do agree with you absolutely when you said that Ivanishvili brought his, I would say, his bank and his family, I don't know, supportive team into the Georgian government in that time. But I think Bibilashvili is a little bit over the top because those people had some trace of, professionalism or whatever, but the Bibilashvili is absolutely different kind of fish. I remember this joke when he was installed as president. There was joke all over the social media that, he was kind of compared to Caligula's horse. But I think that the important thing is that Emperor Caligula did not appoint his horse as senator or consul. He was simply threatening. He was threatening that time Roman political elite to insult them so much. But what Ivanishvili basically did, he didn't threaten anyone. He just did insult, first of all, GD and his own team. By appointing Bibilashvili as president of Georgia, but also the entire political elite and also the entire Georgian population. Because he did things a lot worse than Caligula was intended that time. But anyway, let's
remember one thing. It's been almost a year since Bibilashvili was appointed as president, and to this day, the presidential website is off. It's not working. I mean, the level of insult to him personally from the people who appointed him is staggering. And of course, it's not always the low regard for the person they have installed in that position. But the real reason why that's happening is because the Russians are rewriting our history. Previously, they wanted to say that Saakashvili was bad, Margvelashvili was so-so, but then Salam Zurabishvili was okay. But then they have gone so far in their lunacy that now they need to rewrite history so that they link Saakashvili with Margvelashvili and with Zurabishvili, the latter two being close associates of Ivanishvili, and group them all together, say that these were the Global War Party people, deep state people, and then everything started with Bibilashvili. And then they have spent last year trying to do that, but it's not an easy task. So the result is we'll now have a so-called president who does not even have a website. Speaking of others, we have a situation when the chairman, or maybe he's not a chairman of GD anymore, but the city mayor, Galadze, who is a very powerful individual and as they say, extremely corrupt, and president, they're both footballers with no real education. And the prime minister, as well as the chairman of the parliament, there are people who used to work in foreign organizations and have no other background. They have not traveled the career path
that a politician should
to where they are today. And the good example of what this political system offers is that people such as Gharibashvili, Kvirikashvili, Bakhtadze, and many others, they either disappear from political sphere altogether, or they all of a sudden become foreign agents once they leave their position. So again, everything that we have read in Kafka's books, in Orwell's books, in Fahrenheit 453, all these dystopian realities that we have taught children at some point have come to life in Georgia. We don't need to watch the movies and read those novels. This is where we are.
So I did my homework. I read through your Wikipedia page. It says that you joined the UNM in 2013. It was not the time when it was its prime, but it was the when UNM lost elections and lost power. And in 2015, in one of those international conferences, you said that the reason you joined the Georgian politics, the prime reason why you joined Georgian politics, was that there was, the Russians were coming into power. Since then, at least 10 years passed. And then I remember in 2013 or 2015, there were only a few people who were saying that, well, these people are Russians and they are bringing Russian influence here. And after 10 years from then, now a lot of people, it is crystal clear that yes, Georgia has been taken over by Russians. And that was a Russian special operation by the help of the Ivanishvili's regime. Now Georgia is part of Russian world. Also, I think you acted as a, I would say, stock picker or stock trader. When there is a serious dip on the market, you go and invest your time and finances in a solid company which is down in terms of stock price, but has solid fundamentals and potential to grow. That was the feeling I had when you joined the board of the UNM. So did your investment pay off?
Okay, there was an unexpected end to the question. I think I invested in the truth. I had no other motivation whatsoever. We all know that in this part of the world, people are quick to quit the losers and join the winners. So in the end of 2012 and in 2013, you saw mass migration of mid to low level politicians, activists, officials from UNM to GD. For no particular reason, they just decided, well, now this is the prevailing mood, and we would benefit more if we're now on Ivanishvili's side. Again, to me, who never had any connection with UNM government while UNM was in office, this was a tragic moment because I was realizing that the Russians are here, and I was seeing as one of the radicals who was saying something completely unacceptable. And again, all the signs were there. But the prevailing mood locally and internationally was not to notice the obvious signs. And these were not even the signs. I mean, everything was on the surface. I remember in early 2013, GD appointed GD awarded a certificate or medal of appreciation to one of the most notorious police chiefs from the Shevardnadze time on a police day. What is that signal? So when I spoke with one of the then good GD officials and said, well, what are you guys doing? He said, well, UNM, they took all the qualified cadres with them. And I was like, well, even if they took 100% of good and good specialists and professionals, does that mean that you have to award somebody who made our life hell in years before the Rose Revolution? Of course, there was no answer. Now, most importantly, let's rewind back. Ivanishvili published an article in Wall Street Journal Europe on 2nd or 3rd of August 2012, 2 months before he won the elections. That is a short op-ed. That is his doctrine, how he views Georgia's future in the region, in the world. That column could have been written by and signed by Sergei Lavrov or anybody in Moscow or on Lubyanka. You can make a mistake. You can say some things that is not acceptable, but you cannot be so consistent in repeating all the Russian cliches about Georgia. And this is exactly what Ivanishvili does. He basically says everything, which he now is doing. He was doing the same thing back then, but because of the Saakashvili fatigue, because of some kind of a mood that, well, Europe is tired of this Georgian problem, and let's just get along with the Russians and sweep the Georgians aside for a while, and a variety of other factors, including the fact that you had UNM in office for 2 terms, and that's normally enough for any normal democratic country to get tired of the government and say, let's try somebody else. So there were a combination of legitimate reasons as well as some artificially induced reasons why many people locally and internationally did not want to see the signs. So Ivanishvili said what he was going to do. I'll give you one example. He said, in the Caucasus, you have centuries-old ethnic strife. So basically, he sold Russian occupation as a centuries-old ethnic strife, which is something that Lubyanka wants the West to believe, which basically the message says that, well, these are just aborigines, apologies for this word, some kind of, people who are not sophisticated enough to take care of their own problems. And here are the Russians, they're pacifying the region, they have peacekeepers there. So as long as we don't continue saber rattling, and that's another word from his article, we'll be fine. Again, coming from a Georgian politician, formerly a Georgian politician, it's a catastrophe. And that small column is riddled with Russian cliches and stereotypes, which are absolutely critically bad for Georgia. Now, another few weeks go by, Ivanishvili wins elections, and one of the first things he does, one of his first political acts, is an act of political amnesty. He says that while there were people who were political prisoners in Georgia and they needed to be freed from prisons, now, mind you, in that list, there are several Russian nationals, FSB officers, who were on duty in Georgia and arrested as Russian spies, some of them terrorists, some of them saboteurs, etc. And Ivanishvili not just let them out of prison, because that's something that he could have done. You know, I'm a new government, I want to start from scratch, no matter how bad Russians have behaved. Here, all your spies and agents and saboteurs, let's start over. That could have been more or less legitimate, although I would completely not agree with that policy. But he said, FSB or GRU, I don't remember which was the unit, operatives, officers, Russian nationals, on duty in Georgia to undermine the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Georgia and cause various problems, they had been political prisoners under Saakashvili. That one fact alone is enough to diagnose who Ivanishvili was, because that's not something that is somebody's mistake. I mean, there was a campaign, there was a debate about it in the end of 2012. So it's not something somebody could have missed. And we can go on and on. I don't want to bore our viewers. But all the signs were there. And the only time when we finally agreed that GD is in fact a Russian force, Russian hybrid force to control Georgia, is after GD itself left no other option. GD itself made it impossible for our Western friends to look the other way and not notice the obvious, when basically GD aggressively started to insult and renege its promises and nullified signatures on various agreements, such as the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement, etc., etc., etc. Right? So it's impossible not to notice the obvious, but unfortunately now GD has cemented its power so deeply that, as we discussed before the beginning of this program, it may be too late. I hope it's not too late. But at least it's it's going to be much more difficult and expensive to get out of this hole than it would have been a few years ago, when it was still, when GD's power was still not so cemented, when they had not such an absolute control of everything in Georgia, the media, the business, the courts, local governments, local clans, on and on and on.
You said that let's hope that it's not too late. But again, before we start this kind of assessing the situation where we are at the moment, I think it is important to correctly diagnose what disease Georgia is down with. Because if we don't diagnose it correctly, then treatment wouldn't really help. So again, if we take a look at Georgia now, as we speak, what Georgian Dream has already done, what level of authoritarianism they brought, what legislation they cemented, what is your assessment where we are now? I mean, are we a dictatorship? Are we in the stage of consolidating authoritarianism? Because I mean, if you compare, let's say, laws that we have to Russia or to Belarus or to any other classical authoritarian country, you don't see much difference in terms of legislation nowadays. But in terms of the islands of freedom, in terms of civil society, political parties, they are probably at their weakest point in Georgia's modern history, but they are still strong enough to be counted. So, I mean, where are we, in your opinion?
It's always difficult to apply the correct term, and I'm not that good in theory in that sense. But let's put it this way. The entire opposition is in jail. The leadership, 2 opposition leaders were just recently pardoned by so-called president, but essentially everybody is in jail who participated in elections, who was formerly heading political parties and the opposition, and that is for the first time in Georgia's history. Most importantly, when we talk about dictatorship, the first impulse of a friend from Europe would be, well, you're not a dictatorship, because see, you're sitting in a studio and you're free to discuss these things. True, but let's look at it from the other side. Bibilashvili has absolute power. He has the means and the ability to do whatever he wants in this country. The people who are now in jail, they're in jail and not dead because he doesn't need that. And we're here and not in jail because apparently we're not enough of a threat.
We're not important
and
enough.
that could change in an instance. So we're not here because it's an island of freedom, because somebody does not need us in jail. Somebody does not need people in jail dead. But let us also remind our viewers that unlike the UNM years, during GD you have had a string of contract killings, which has affected criminals, businesses, high-ranking businessmen, very rich and influential people, and people in the media. So that too is a signal that, well, yes, of course, the state has nothing to do with that, but well, there can be somebody who is mysteriously killed, and well, the investigation doesn't yield any results. So it's basically a warning sign to everybody who is or may be ambitious to leave their comfort zone and decide to affect things on a higher level, on a wider scale. So to go back to your question, whether we are a dictatorship, we are a country where there is a guy with absolute power, who owns the government, who owns the police, who owns the prosecutor's office, who owns the parliament, who owns the courts, and controls them through corruption and the so-called kompromat. He uses that to the extent he needs it. So the legislation which his illegitimate parliament adopted in the last few months makes it possible for him to legally suppress everything, all dissent, legally control the media, the content of the media. At this point, he doesn't need it, but is he going that way? Yes, he's going that way. When he came out, when Bibilashvili came out at a rally in April of 2024, people were shocked because he said things which he was doing anyway, but he now openly declared that yes, he was going to pursue that course, and the conspiracy theories which prior to that had been left for some marginal forces to talk about now migrated into the highest to the message of highest government officials and Bibilashvili personally. So things change very quickly, and we need to be flexible, we need to adapt, and we also need to foresee and prevent. The problem for Georgians and for our international friends has been that we have been in a reactionary mode. We have been late to realize what the problem is and late to react to those problems. And we've never, in the last 10, 15 years, been able to set our own agenda for public sphere.
Let me put the question slightly differently from different angle. Again, over the years, I've heard people around me talking that, well, the dictatorship is impossible in Georgia for two reasons. And the reason one is that the Georgians wouldn't take it. Okay, so we are a proud, people that love freedom, etc., etc. So, and we wouldn't take that. Another argument that was coming in was that Georgia doesn't have enough resources to sustain dictatorship for a considerable time. And if you compare it to Belarus or Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan is an oil-rich nation. Belarus has its Soviet economy ingrained that much that it can feed its people. Georgia is dependent on Western liberal economy, banking system. It's open with its nature. So it it cannot provide enough resources for dictatorship. So what is your take on this? I mean, is it possible if we take from that angle?
First, I never take the argument that it's not possible for Georgia or for Georgians. We are just like any other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, we're proud, we have a long history, rich culture, etc., but we're not unique in a sense
Mm-hmm.
that we're not better than some other peoples who have been suffering from a dictatorship. So it's always possible. Another argument is that now is not the time. Times have changed. I remember 100 years ago. When I say I remember, by the way, I recall that phrase, the famous phrase from Ronald Reagan's first State of the Union address, when he says that Thomas Jefferson once says something, and then he said, for the people in the press here in the audience who place a high premium on accuracy, I was not there to actually witness Thomas Jefferson say that. So yes, but I remember as a collective Georgian, as somebody who has to remember that 100 years ago, the government of the Georgian Social Democrats of the First Georgian Republic said, and that was a prevailing mood there, well, now is no longer the time for a country to conquer another country with force. Now we have a League of Nations, times have changed, the Great War is over. So yes, Russians are not very friendly and they have multiple problems inside Bolshevik Russia, but we're immune from some problems that people should normally foresee. As it turned out, that worse was yet to come, and we can recall examples from our region as well, from south and east of Georgia. Recall the case of Iran. Recall the case of Afghanistan, which were secular, modern, developing countries decades ago, and then it all stopped overnight. So nobody's ever immune from a dictatorship.
Even in Europe, so you can take a look at half a century ago, the Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece. I don't know.
I wanted to mention that as well, clearly. So what would make the Georgians different from those countries? In addition, the argument of resources is not applicable because GD is not an isolated force. As we mentioned, GD is a Russian hybrid force, so Russians have an interest to maintain GD in power, no matter the cost, and the cost is not too high. So if Russia and China, for example, and maybe Iran, make a tripartite deal saying that, well, let's keep GD in power, what is needed to keep a country of less than 4 million people fed to a minimum? Okay, let's just put in some funds, not even directly, some state-owned companies, some tourists, etc. That would provide enough resources to keep GD in power. So again, falling back on an argument that Bibilashvili does not have resources to keep this country as his own backyard and to be a virtual dictator is not a legitimate position, and we should not hope for that. We should be much more active in preventing that scenario from finally occurring.
Yeah, let's move on. I think indeed Georgia as a state, as a democratic state, as a free state, is in grave danger. And most importantly, the citizens of Georgia who cares about Georgia's democratic European future, so we need to do something to save this country. Of course, together with our partners in the West. So what needs to be done to, again, save Georgia as a free state, to save Georgia's democracy, however imperfect it has been all the way? And I'll give you some upcoming, points that we will see very soon. For example, 4th of October. And the part of Georgians say that, well, this is going to be the end of GD, and we will come out and we will fight and we will do this, including some of the politicians are saying that will be a single day operation on the 4th of October. The others are saying that this is going to be a long fight, and 4th of October could be one stage in this, the long fight. Of course, the GD is saying that, well, they are going to ban most of the opposition political parties, and I think they will do that because when the dust settles after 4th of October, I mean, you tell me why they should not do it, or they have all the leverage in terms of legislation and in terms of power to do so. At some point, political leaders who are behind the bars, they will come out, most likely at the beginning of 2026. How do you see all this? How should we navigate here to make sure that, and let's face it, we don't have a lot of time. So when we are saying that it is going to be a long fight, I am really afraid here that I think we need to put some deadlines there, because I mean, if it is too long, then I don't think it will bring the desired results. Because if you've been under dictatorship for 1 or 2 or 5 years, then coming back it's too difficult. And even if then you destroy the dictatorial regime, it will take another decade to recover from the traumas that dictatorship inflicted on you as a nation. So what do you think about that?
Well, first let's say that it has already been a long fight. For those of us who have been identifying GD as a Russian hybrid force, it has been 13 years. There have been people who spent years and years in Ivanishvili's prisons, precisely because they were ordered by the Russians. People who were fighting the Russian interests in the Caucasus, our special force officers who have been bravely fighting in the occupied Abkhazia, in the rest of the Georgian territory. Some of them have been have been incarcerated for many years. Some of them have been dying mysteriously. I should remember the officers of this small Kodori 2007 unit, a small 15-member unit, eight members of which have died in mysterious circumstances, 5 of them in 2014. So it has already been a long fight, and I should not say that people are not tired of this, but again, to have a definitive opinion about the October 4th, you need to have more information. If I had more information, I would probably still not disclose it, but I don't have enough information to say that it will be a 24 or 48 hour effort and then GD will be over, or vice versa. The point is that we need to continue for as long as it takes. If it's over on the same day, so much the better. If it's not, then what options do we have? We need to continue until the regime until Georgia is rid of Ivanishvili's regime. I have compared Georgian Dream to the Vichy government in I think it was in 2013, an article which says that much like in the World War II France period, Russia controls parts of our country directly and militarily, and the rest of the country is controlled by a so-called patriotic government, which says, well, Russia is too strong, we're too pragmatic, we put a high value on high premium on family values, on traditional values. I mean, the analogies with the Vichy government are startling. So I don't know how long it will take. Like I said, it has already been too long, but it seems like there is a public consensus that this needs to come to an end. This is no longer, the reason why this has lasted for so long is because in the early years of GD, this was seen as something, GD's authoritarian tendencies were seen as something directed solely at UNM. UNM's officials, UNM supporters, and the rest of the public saw it like, well, we don't like it, but it doesn't really affect us. So now this has affected everyone. So when you go out to the street, you don't see any segment of the population, any citizen who is not directly affected, who is not angry, who is not insulted by what they're seeing, what they're hearing, and the conditions in which the country is existing today. So, like I said, I think it's ripe. It's ripe as ever. The consensus is there that GD needs to go, and there's another also very important realization that came with that consensus is that, unfortunately, the likelihood of that happening through elections is purely theoretical. Essentially, during 2024 elections, GD said, well, that's the end of elections in Georgia. Every other elections, well, I think previously it was very similar to that, but now it was stated in an open way that we write the numbers. So as Joseph Stalin once said, he who counts the votes wins the election. So in this case, the only people who are in the room when the votes are counted are GD people. It's their special services, it's their Central Election Commission. May I also remind the viewers that for months and months, the part of the Central Election Commission web page, which allowed people to verify their status in the lists, was blocked, was under construction, and then now it's back online. Why is that important? Because I have been saying for years that one of the fundamental issues with the elections is not just those issues which are already identified, such as the administrative interference, such as the criminals as organized gangs outside of voting booths, such as illegal finances, on and on and on, but the rigged election lists, and also lists which are basically coordinated by the authorities. So people who are outside of Georgia, Georgians who live in Germany or the US who are unable to vote or are unlikely to vote, somebody votes for them here based on a duplicate ID. Now, there have been hundreds of cases when people randomly checked their addresses and discovered strange people registered at their addresses. And then after the elections, the site goes under construction and those people disappear. So it's a perfect crime. Somebody appears in your address, votes presumably, and then they disappear. So obviously there is somebody somewhere who keeps track of those files, because this is how Russians work. But to somebody like us, it's impossible to definitively say this is what happened. But the likelihood of the fact that this is exactly what happened is very high. So public finally realized that we don't really have many choices. We have basically an option of total public disobedience and a peaceful change, which may not necessarily be linked to elections, because elections have been canceled. I mean, this is mockery of elections. This is an aberration of the concept of elections. So it's not an easy situation, and it's obviously not a situation which can be solved with an easy formula. It's a continuous fight. It takes planning. It takes a long-term vision. It takes patience, something that Georgians don't necessarily like or are trained for. But this is something that we're seeing on the other side, and I think that we should learn from the opponents, if this is the word that we can use for them.
Interesting. Thank you. Would you like to add something as a salt to this podcast before we call it that day?
Nothing except that I think this is a very useful and very, very good format that you have come up with your colleagues. So all the very best to this platform.
Thank you. And thank you for watching us, listening to us. Please subscribe to our new YouTube channel, and I'll see you next week.